Thank you. Okay, so we will continue our discussion on gradient descent, and today we are going to see how we actually use gradient descent in like training any kind of smooth function in machine learning. And there are various kinds of variants which we will use today. So essentially, I'm going to talk about all these things today. And then if time permits, then I will get into the introduction to deep neural network. And then we will basically continue this discussion in the next few lectures. Okay. So that's my plan. Again, if you have any doubt at any point of time, so please feel free to interrupt me. Okay. So this is the more or less the thing that we have been doing, the local and global minima things I talked about yesterday. So on the left side, you have the univariate function, often referred to as curve. So you can see the global and local minima. Typically, when you have a non-convex function, then you expect there will be lots of such local minima. Okay. And so no algorithm can guarantee that you are going to get the global minima. Similarly, when we are dealing with multivariate functions, something like typically we deal in all deep learning and machine learning things. So it's all multivariate functions depending upon the number of parameters that you have. So you are dealing with surface, okay, rather than the like simple curve, okay. And the surface actually become much more complicated than the univariate curves, okay. But principle more or less we will use the gradient information to figure out in which direction we should move, okay. So the nature of the functions that we will be dealing with in most of the machine learning is multivariate functions. So there are multiple variables, okay. And the property that we use is that the function has to be continuous for gradient descent. Okay? That is why you remember that we had considered the squared error instead of the absolute error. Okay, that was the reason that you want to make it continuous. Okay. Differentiability, because you are using differentiation, the derivative, to guide your optimization. So differentiability, desirable condition, if you have that good, if still you do not have that, you can still manage. Okay, you can still manage non-differentiable functions. So when we talk about ReLU and things like that, we get to know how we do that. Little bit of like manual tweaking and things actually make it work. Okay, so that is not a problem at all. And we will see a couple of examples. Okay, we had been talking about the gradient descent. Just quick recap of what we started talking about yesterday. That say we have an objective function, and here my objective function is the squared error defined over all the samples in your training data. And on the right side, you can see the pattern of the training data. So you have input. Input could be some d-dimensional feature vector, and you have an output. So output is basically a class level or a regression value, whatever. And basically we define the error function based on this entire set. Okay. And so your objective is to kind of find the minimum value of the function and also the parameters which are actually minimizing this value. Okay. Similarly, gradient descent in multivariate function, we talked about what? Say, for example, if you take linear regression on multivariate data, okay, you have this kind of form, you define the error function, then instead of taking the total derivative, you have to take partial derivative with respect to all these parameters, because now you are dealing with the multivariate functions. Okay. So these are like some of the basic things that we talked about yesterday. And so we also looked at the gradient descent thing here. So we basically want to reach here. So you randomly select the initial values which you talked about, then you repeat until convergence, then compute the partial derivatives, basically update it. Okay. And when you see that these values are not changing too much, or you basically have done a large number of iterations, then you basically stop. So that's what we basically talked about. Okay. So here the main thing is the derivative that you are computing with respect to all the parameters. So the derivative of the error function E is defined over all the examples. Okay. By the way, this gradient descent, people often call this as vanilla gradient descent. So people use interchangeably gradient descent or vanilla gradient descent. Okay, that's the kind of thing talking about. Okay, all right. So what is this? So that's until this one, we basically talked about things in our yesterday's lecture. And so what is the trouble with this approach? Let's start with that, and then we basically gradually build up on things. Okay, things on this. So the problem in this case is that here is the problem, and I use this particular error function, total error function. Okay, this is called the batch gradient descent because you are basically taking all the samples to guide your direction. Okay? That's why it's called batch. The whole batch you are taking. Okay, so I have my error function defined. Okay, now take, say, for example, the linear regression. Okay, the simplest function that we can think about it. And so just, I'm using this example to illustrate the point. So yeah, so let's take linear regression as a your function, the main function, and then on top of this, you define the error function et. Okay. Now, if you compute the derivative of et with respect to theta 0, one parameter, then you are going to get something like this. So this is like trivial derivative. You can do it like when you have some free time, just like plain. So del et del theta 1 also is going to be something like this. It's just plain derivative you can do, and so on and so forth. So in general, what we can write it down in this form. So for any parameter theta j, you can write it down in the general form from the gradient descent function. From the linear regression function, and if you have the total error, squared error. Okay. So now, what's the update rule? Recall the update rule that we have in gradient descent. The update rule is going to be something like this: theta j is equals to the theta j, actually theta j new is equals to the theta j old minus r, the learning rate, into the gradient that you have computed. Okay, and that basically for all thetas you have to compute it. I just simply replace this derivative from the previous equation to this equation, nothing else. Everything remains the same. Okay, so that's the update rule that we're going to apply. Now let's try to analyze this particular expression and try to understand what is the problem with this batch gradient descent. Okay, so the parameter update cost. What is this cost? So for each parameter theta j, because your model has n plus 1 parameters, right? In this case, because it's an n plus 1 thetas you have in your model. So for each such parameter theta j, which is basically n plus 1, we need to process all training samples. Why? Because remember this expression, you look at this expression summation over I is equals to 1 to m, the derivative expression, that involves all the samples in your training data. Okay, for every update, okay, for every parameter, you need to compute that expression. Okay, and for a large number of data, if you have large number of training samples, that is going to be very, very time consuming process. Okay, so in other words, if you have k parameters in your model and if you have n training samples, we need k into n processing. Okay, k into n processing for a single update. Okay, for a single update, you basically need that kind of that much amount of processing. And for a very large number of data points, which is typically the case for modern machine learning methods, you deal with lots of data, okay, and lots of parameters, I mean lots of like dimension. So this is going to be very, very costly. Okay, think about a billion examples. The number of points in your training data is billions, and you have say 10,000 dimensional data. When you're dealing with the image, for example, image has lots of like pixels and lots of images. You can simply understand how complicated this is going to be. Okay, so computationally. So that is one of the biggest problem with the batch gradient descent. Okay, so when you are taking all the training samples. So what can we do to address this problem? Let's see what can we do. Okay, so here is a practical solution. This is an approximate solution. Remember that we often do approximation in order to achieve some goal. Okay, so you probably want to sacrifice accuracy a little bit, but you want to speed up the computation to make things more practical. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So a practical solution people often refer to as the stochastic gradient descent, or SGD in short. often you hear this name called SGD. Okay, people call it SGD, stochastic gradient descent. It also has its own variants. We will see later on in a few minutes. But let me start with the simplest version of stochastic gradient descent. Okay, so what is that? So this quick reminder from the previous discussion. Okay, what is the reminder? That in batch gradient descent, the direction of movement, because the direction of which direction you should move so that you can basically find out at least the local minima. Okay, that's the main purpose of computing the gradient. So direction of movement depends on all training samples. Remember that you are computing these gradients using all training samples in the previous case, batch gradient descent. So what is the approximation here? So in stochastic gradient descent, the approximation here is, so this was the expression from the batch gradient descent. So but basic idea behind stochastic gradient descent is that the direction of movement is approximated by only one training sample at a time. I am not going to use all the training samples in my data, but rather my direction of movement will be approximated by only one sample at a time. Okay, so let's see how that actually happens. So here is this algorithm. So you define the error function on a single training sample. Remember that in the previous case, you defined your error function on all the training samples. But now we are defining error function on a single training sample. So something like this. You take ith sample, you only compute your error function on that. Okay. Now you compute the gradient on a single training sample. Oh, okay. So something like this. So you have the EI, then you compute the del EI del theta j for all the j that you have, for all the parameters that you have. And then basically this is the algorithm look like. So again, you have to initialize all these parameters. So there is no way you can do that, no other way except randomly initializing these values. So first step, you randomly initialize all these parameters in this model that you have, all thetas. Then repeat until convergence, the same convergence rule that we applied. So randomly shuffle all training data. That is very important because by shuffling, you are basically, in a sense, de-biasing this data. Okay. So because we are doing stochastic gradient descent, so randomly shuffle all training sample, and then you take one sample at a time. So take first sample, okay. Then you compute this, update this. Take second sample, you update all the parameters. Take third sample, update all the parameters, and so on and so forth. Okay. So that is how basically you are going to move in standard stochastic gradient descent. Okay. So small remark in this. So remember that in the batch gradient descent, say for example, your learning rate is R. Okay, that's the amount of jump that you are making. So in batch gradient descent, what is happening? That after an entire full batch is processed, all the training samples is processed, you are only making approximately R amount of jump because one update you are using all the samples. Approximately R amount of jump. But in this case, stochastic gradient descent, assuming that you have been using only one sample, then once you are done with all the training samples in a single pass, then you are actually making approximately n into R jump. Because one sample is helping you to make R amount of jump. Therefore, n samples is making you to basically do R into n times. So basically nr amount of jump. Okay. And that is how basically it is actually speeding up your training process and computation. Okay. So now let's look at, of course, it has its own problem because this is approximation. You are using one training sample to guide your direction. Who says that that's the right thing to do? Okay, so it has its own problem. Okay, so what? Sir, yes, please go ahead.
Sir, here by the second point, you mean that for calculating the theta j, every time for all j, we randomly shuffle the training samples and select one training sample for each j.
Okay, no. So what I'm trying to say is that before you start updating your parameters, you randomly shuffle once. Okay, so you have say 10 samples in your data. So you randomly shuffle this data, then you apply this for I equals to 1 to n this step. So once you have done on all the training samples, then again you go back and randomly shuffle the data again, and then I will apply. Okay. Does this make sense, or still you have doubt?
No, sir. Like I'm asking, like that EI will be same for all J.
EI will be same. Yeah, EI will be same for all J. That's true.
That is randomly selected. No.
Yeah, so you randomly, so for example, when you are processing sample number 1, okay, then you basically update these parameters. Then when you're taking sample number 2, you are not randomly shuffling data. Okay, you are using this data that you shuffled already before. So you take the whole pass 1, 2 up to n. Okay, you basically update these parameters up to 1, 2, 3 up to n, and then you basically again randomly shuffle the data and then basically apply the same process.
Okay, sir.
You have got it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, yeah, okay. So at the beginning, you once shuffle the randomly shuffle the data, and then basically update these parameters. Okay. Sure. All right. Okay. So any other question from anybody? Okay, fair enough. So okay. So now let's move forward. Okay. Now the actual thing that we use now in all modern deep learning, when you get to know deep learning, then we actually use mini batch stochastic gradient descent. Okay, neither batch nor single element stochastic gradient descent. We want to use mini batch stochastic gradient descent. So why? Okay, now in mini batch stochastic gradient descent, the idea is to take kind of a middle path between previous two ideas. Okay, I'm not going to take all the examples because of computational burden. I am not going to take a single example because the single example may misguide me. Okay, it may misguide my direction because every time you are consulting a single example to tell you that which direction you should take. Now there could be error in the data, there could be high variability in the data, and so on and so forth. If all the points are in coherence, okay, they are agreeable, okay, so then basically you can find out always the right direction. But some points may be erroneous, some for some reason, and so on. So they can basically misguide you. They can basically tell you that okay, you should not move in this direction, you should move in opposite direction, things like that. That can happen. That's the problem with the single element gradient descent, stochastic gradient descent. So in order to avoid that kinds of problems, okay, we basically want to apply a mini batch stochastic gradient descent. And again, the idea is basically very simple, that only when you are computing the gradient, you use a batch of B training samples. Not one, not all, but a batch of B. B is typically a small number. Sometimes it is in thousands, sometimes it is in like hundreds and things like this. Okay. So you take a batch of training examples and then you compute the error function, compute the gradient, and then you move forward. So here is this algorithm, same algorithm, little bit of change. So again, first step would be randomly set the parameters. So do that. Then you have to set the value of B batch size. Okay, it's essentially grouping your training data, 10, 10, 10, or 20, 20, 20, something like that. Okay, so that you have to basically set. And then again repeat until convergence. What you do, you randomly shuffle the training data again, just like the previous case. And for every mini batch I, so now that you have say a number of mini batches of every batch size B, so every mini batch I, you compute error function on mini batch EI, then you basically go and apply your update rule, the same update rule, only that your mini batch is basically driving your direction. Okay, and you are done. Okay. So typically people take like batch size is not something that you can determine very nicely. It depends on the data, task, and everything. So that basically trial and error. Okay. So let me put a summary slide of what we have done so far. So three possible things that we talked about: the batch gradient descent, stochastic gradient descent, and mini batch gradient descent. So people also call mini batch gradient descent also as a stochastic gradient descent. Okay, so like, or the standard stochastic gradient descent as one batch, one element stochastic gradient descent. So there is several names of that. Okay. So just to summarize the whole thing, so the batch gradient descent, the direction of movement, which is the gradient they're telling you, so it's computed using all training samples. In stochastic gradient descent, you use only one training sample to guide your direction. And in mini batch gradient descent, you use a batch of samples, okay? Small batch of samples to guide your direction, okay? So this basically, these are the basically main differences between these three approaches. But in all modern deep learning, we use mini batch gradient descent. Okay, because of it's not computationally too expensive. Also, it is not too brittle, just like the one element stochastic gradient descent. Okay. So up to this, anybody has any question?
Sir.
Yes, please go ahead.
Sir, for batch gradient descent and mini batch gradient descent, when we are updating the theta values, shouldn't it be theta j minus r by the size of that batch into the differentiation?
This one, you mean this expression, theta j minus theta j, the old theta j minus r into this del ei del theta j, that's what you are referring to?
Yes, sir. Like it shouldn't it be r by b, like the b value?
Okay, so you mean you want to kind of take the average of all the samples, right? That's what that people you can do actually. So essentially, when you are taking r by b, that reduces to again another constant, right? So because r is you set a priori, b is also set a priori, so it just like reduces to another constant. Okay.
Sir. Yes.
Yeah.
Sir.
Yeah. Okay. Any other question from anybody?
Sir, in stochastic gradient descent and mini batch stochastic gradient descent, for a particular theta j, for each iteration, are we using the same EI or we are changing the EI for every iteration?
No, you are changing the EI because your EI depends on the sample that you are choosing.
Okay, sir.
Okay.
So for each,
yeah.
So for each iteration, we are changing the EI.
Exactly. Changing in the sense that you do not change the nature of the function. So for example, if you decide to use squared error, that's squared error. But the actual value will change because you are actually using a particular sample to do that.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, yes, please go ahead.
Can we change the EI for each iteration? I mean, the given EI will be the same for one particular parameter estimation, right?
So given EI will change for one particular parameter estimation.
No, will remain same for one particular parameter estimation, but it will change for another parameter, right?
You mean the parameter or sample?
Parameter, not sample.
No, given EI will remain same.
So for one theta j, single EI will be required to estimate it, right, to the end.
Right.
So EI won't change for one particular parameter for all the iterations.
Okay, for all the iterations, yeah, absolutely. But there are two modes of doing these things. That's called synchronous and asynchronous. So in synchronous, what happens is that now see, for example, you have say 5 thetas, theta 0 to theta 4. Okay, now theta 0 you have computed. Okay, now when you're computing theta 1, you may want to use theta 0 that you computed last. Okay, the latest updated value. So if you want to do that, then your error function will change a little bit. Okay, the mode that you are referring to is called synchronous in the sense that once from the previous iteration you basically using this all theta values in this. But you are right, absolutely right. Two ways to do it here.
So, but like I did not get the point. Like for a particular theta j, till the end, for all the iterations, are we using the same EI? Like are we changing the sample, or we are not changing the sample?
So you are actually okay. Let me just try that. Maybe I can use pen and paper and explain. Okay, so something like this. So you have something like this. Say you have training sample, so xi and yi. Sorry, let's not x1, y1, x2, y2, x3, y3. Okay. So the x's are basically the feature vectors, and y's are the levels. Okay. Now you are choosing this one. Okay, this particular thing. Then you are computing, say, e from here. Oh, sorry. So now you are computing e from here. Okay, only based on that. Now you apply these update rules based on this. So for theta1, theta0, theta1, okay, so this pen is problematic. Let me just, pen is getting trouble. Okay. So this is theta1, and then you basically do another thing. Okay. Anyway, so okay, so the point is that you have, say, one sample you are taking, you are computing one error function based on that. Okay, and then you basically update all these parameters based on that error function. So for theta0, you basically take the derivative of e with respect to theta0, you update. Similarly for theta1, same error function. Okay, from the sample you are basically computing the derivative and updating, and then theta2, theta3, theta4, and so on and so forth, everything. Okay, then you go back, take the next sample, which is x2, y2, then do the same procedure.
Oh, okay, sir. So now I got it. Fine.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So for every theta, like if you update theta0, then our hypothesis will change, and then we update theta1, or do we keep the hypothesis same after for updating all theta?
So by hypothesis, what do you mean? Like the error function or what? Or
So h theta, like when we calculate the square error, so we take the hypothesis function minus the output what we have in the training set.
yeah, the actual function, yeah, and your model minus the output predicted by this. Yeah, that's right.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir. So if we update theta0, then do we change the hypothesis function before updating theta1? Because theta0 has changed now.
Yeah, so basically that's what I was talking about. There are two modes of doing these things, called synchronous and asynchronous. So people apply both the techniques. Okay, so like you want to, you can basically use this latest value of theta0 when you are computing theta1, or you can use the old value of theta0 as well. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Okay. So any other question from this?
Sir, how does this mini batch method is computationally efficient than the regular batch method?
Okay, so in regular batch, if you have, say, 1 lakh examples, then for one update, you are using all 1 lakh examples or 1 lakh training samples. Okay. But in mini batch, once you said that my batch size is 100, then how much? Maybe 1000, probably 1000 batches that you are processing, right? So for one update, you are using only 100 samples, not all 1 lakh samples that you are doing. And that is where you are getting the benefit.
Sir, but aren't we dividing all of the training example in batches of size B?
That is true, but then for every update, for changing, say, theta, you are changing, no, thetas. So from one update, for once, think about in terms of one update. Okay, one jump. So for one update, in batch, you are only using a batch size of B samples, which is much smaller than the entire set of data that you have.
Sir, I just want to verify if I'm getting it right.
Right.
In case of batch gradient descent, for example, if we are calculating for one particular theta j, our error function will be constituting of all the training examples, right?
In batch gradient descent?
In batch gradient descent.
No. That is the difference. So error function will only be computed based on the batch that you are considering.
In mini batch gradient descent, we are taking one particular set, right, of size B.
So okay, let me just like put the things in context. So in batch, error function is defined in terms of all the samples in your data. Okay, so you agree on that point?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In single sample example, stochastic gradient descent, your error function is computed on only one single sample that you are considering at a time. Okay. Okay, or you have any question there?
Yes, sir. No question.
And in mini batch, now basically mini batch means you have batches. So batches of like so basically samples in groups. Okay, if I think in terms of that, so groups, group 1, group 2, group 3, group 2. So error function is defined on a particular group that you are considering. Okay.
Yes.
So if your data, like there are 4 samples in your data, x1, x2, x3, x4, then the batch size is 2. Then first you compute error based on x1, x2. Then you update all the parameters. Then next you compute error function based on x3, x4. Then you update the parameters and so on and so forth. Okay. Any question, any doubt?
No, sir.
Okay, all right. Yeah. So it's essentially, it enhances the computational time. Okay. You quickly get to the endpoint. Endpoint in the sense that maybe local minima. You never get global minima or never guarantee global minima. So, but that's what we do. Okay. But it's an approximation technique of the real gradient descent. Okay. So, all right. So let's move forward and see like what. Okay. All right. Now the question is that what is the limitations of gradient descent, the one that we saw so far? Okay. Even you consider something like this mini batch or whatever. Okay. So one of the main thing in this case is the learning rate, and which you kept constant, okay, throughout your iterations and the whole process. Okay. So what are the consequences of that? What happens if R is actually small? Okay. And what happens if R is big? Okay. Now let's try to look into these things and try to understand what happens, okay, when R is small and R is big. So here is the situation. So the update rule, is this. So for small value of R, what happens? That is very slow convergence. Okay, let me just try to use the pen again, creating some trouble, but anyway, I will try. So what happens is that you basically have very small amount of jump. Okay, if the value of R is very small, then from here you have this. Okay, then here you have this, and so on. You're basically moving down. Okay, so basically for small value of R, you are taking very little jump, and the whole process is going to be slow. Okay, for large data again, that's going to be a problematic thing. Okay, right. Now, what happens when you have set the value of R to a very large value? Okay, so of course it will depend on the nature of the surface that you are trying to model. Okay, so something like if a stiff surface like this on the right side, if the value of R is very large, then basically you are taking very big jump. Okay, here to here, and then here to here, then here to here, and then probably here to here. Okay, you basically overshoot. So this is your end point, the desirable point that you are targeting actually. Okay, this is the end point. So that is the problem. Again, because you are basically using gradient descent techniques, so of course when you are in this particular position, jumping, so your gradient will tell, okay, no, you are in the wrong direction, you move other direction, and so you kept your R value very large. So again, it will basically try to go in this direction. Okay, then again your gradient descent will tell you, no, you are in the wrong direction, you move other direction, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that is the typical problem. It's called oscillation problem, overshooting problem. When you have large value of R, and the surface that you are trying to model is very steep. Okay, so you have both kinds of problem depending upon how you set your value of R and nature of the surface that you have. Okay, so therefore, yeah, go ahead.
Sir, but can't we use a predicate function and predict the exact optimum value of R? Like we can keep a function which will check if it's overshooting or going very slow, and then we can keep varying R in between.
Okay, so of course you can do some kind of, in the next slide I will talk about adaptive gradient descent, which is trying to adapt the R with respect to the other gradient values. But yeah, of course we can do that. But getting the optimal value of R is probably is very challenging. At least nobody knows how to get that. But yes, I mean, you can use some information, other information to kind of figure out the value of R adaptively with respect to the surface that you are dealing with. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now let's see how we can do that. We have some methods for that. So this is called the adaptive gradient descent. Okay, so the problem was in this previous case is that you kept your R constant throughout your computation, throughout the process, and that created all the problems for you. So one popular method is called adaptive gradient descent. Is called this ADAGRAD also. The main idea is that learning rate is different for different parameters. Okay, it's not same for all the parameters, unlike the standard stochastic gradient case. And also, the learning rate will be determined by the previous gradients. Okay, what was the previous gradients? And so you can use that to kind of guide. So previous gradients will tell you to some extent that whether the curve is actually steep or like flat. Okay, you can actually use this information to change your learning rate adaptively, okay, as you progress. That's what we do. Okay. So let's try to understand how this actually happens. So the idea that we use is this. Okay. So the ADAGRAD, the only thing that we are making in this case, you can see this expression on the right side, that the denominator sitting below R, okay, is the one. That's the only additional expression that we're introducing in this case. Okay. So what is that expression? So GTI means, of course, the GT will depend on the corresponding parameter. So I denotes the corresponding parameter, actually, the ith parameter, and T means the iteration number. So GTI is the sum of the squares of the gradients with respect to theta I, okay, up to some time step T. So you are constantly updating your values, okay, for different thetas, you are computing the gradients and so on and so forth. So GT essentially is so far that whatever updates that you have made, all in all the iteration, you take the gradients, take their square and the sum, and then simply divide this in this particular expression. Now, there is a small quantity called epsilon, which is a smoothing constant. Again, this is a very small value actually. So in case that accidentally or for some reason GTI becomes 0 or very small number, so the epsilon actually can smooth this value a little bit. Okay, so it's basically a constant number, usually set very small number. Okay, so let's see that how we actually do this thing, something like this. So let me just try to draw a small figure and try to explain. So say for example, I have a surface like this. Okay, and you are moving forward. So here I have a gradient. Here I have a gradient. So I compute this as G1, for example, which is basically nothing but say particular theta. You can consider it particular theta. Okay, so yeah, the gradient is G1. Okay, del E del theta, something like this. Okay, then you have here, you have G2, you have here, you have G3, and so on and so forth. Okay, and so GT is basically this one, GT for some theta. Okay, here I'm not denoting because I have only a kind of two-dimensional surface, so I'm not denoting by anything. So it's basically the square, the sum of squares of this. So this is G1 square, this is G2 square, this is G3 square, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's basically your GT. As you move forward, you take all these basically gradients and sum them up to get these values. Okay, so how this is actually helping? So GT is actually collecting information about the past gradients, and so it will tell you the nature of the surface, whether it is too steep, whether it is too flat, and things like that. And you are using that information to control this value of R little bit, so that you can basically avoid the problems that we have seen before. Okay. So let's take probably one example to kind of illustrate this point. Okay, so how does this actually add up depending upon the nature of the surface that you have?
Sir,
Yes, please go ahead.
that means the learning parameter will continue to decrease over time.
Learning parameter can decrease over time. So it depends on not always. It depends on the nature of the surface that we're dealing with.
No, like, but that square root will always increase. Like the sum of the squares will increase over time, right?
Right.
Then the denominator will increase, so that R by the denominator will decrease.
But you know, if your gradients are very small, okay, so you are assuming probably that the GT, I mean, it will increase only when the GT is higher than 1, right? Greater than 1. Otherwise, it is not going to increase. Okay?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Right? So, yeah.
Yes.
It depends. Go ahead.
So like suppose we have three parameters, theta 1, theta 2, theta 3. So for theta 3, when we're updating, we'll take sum of gradient squares of theta 1 and theta 2, like del E by del theta 1 square plus.
No. So GIT actually, you know, there's an index called I. So it's only corresponding to that particular parameter. Okay. So it is not like, you know, so for theta 1, when you are computing G for theta 1, so you only use the gradients of theta 1 only, past gradients of theta 1 only. Similarly, for theta 2, you only use the past gradients of theta 2 only. Okay.
So, sir, so for the first iteration, it will be 0, right? So like divided by root epsilon will be very big value, right?
For the first iteration, but you know, for first iteration, yeah, absolutely, yes. It should be very big number. Yeah, right. You're right.
Okay.
Yeah, that is true.
Sir.
Yeah.
Like in the previous case, I was asking that sum of the squares will increase, whether it is less than 1 or greater than 1. Like every time we are increasing the GTI value, right, by adding the previous time steps gradients.
Right.
So automatically, like for every t plus 1, the GTI will increase, right? Because we are adding a new term every time, new square term every time.
Right. Yeah, you are absolutely right. But in fact, in reality, you do not, like, people generally do not consider like all the previous history, like last few history, for example.
Okay.
But you are right. Absolutely. Okay. Any other question?
Sir, I have a question.
Yes,
Sir,
sir.
just now you said that if people generally don't consider all the history but last few history, then let us consider the case where it is very close to the optimal value. Let's say our theta is very close to the optimal value.
Right.
So then actually the gradients, the GI's value for the past few history will be very less, like approximately almost near to 0. So then the learning rate would shoot up automatically, and then it will result in overshooting, right?
Yes, that's correct. Provided that your history is very small, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that may happen. So, for example, the latest history that you're taking is very small in length. That may happen. Yes, you are right.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Any other question?
Hello, sir.
Yeah, please go
So
ahead.
with such a large gradient, there is with such a large training parameter, there is such a possibility that instead of descending, it will start shooting upwards the parabola. Isn't there such a possibility?
Repeat your question.
With such a large r, the value of r,
Mhm.
is there a possibility that the value of theta, the value of the function starts shooting upwards instead of descending into the gradient?
Yeah, that can happen. In fact, that happens many times in practical machine learning applications. Yeah,
So
that happens.
there's no particular solution to that. We just have to change the values of
Yeah,
epsilon randomly and try to achieve that gradient.
absolutely, yes. Because these are so the problem is basically that the surface that we are dealing with, so loss surface, a loss function, it contains like thousands of parameters, and you never know the nature of the surface. So it's all like there are few guidelines. You basically start with large number, then you continuously decrease, and this and that. But you are right. There is no definitive approach to tell you that okay, no, this is not going to happen. It's all trial and error.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
So that is why if you kind of read any, even if the most famous machine learning paper, you will see there are lots of experimental results. Okay, that with varying parameters and this and that, people actually putting results only because of that. Okay, so there will be next week there will be one assignment based on this. So I will ask you to actually run these things in multiple data sets and for multiple values, and you get to know what happens in reality. Okay. Okay. So any other question? Okay, all right. So I think we can now like take a break, short break. It's almost 9, and then we will come back and then basically talk about other stuff. Okay.
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah, please.
Sir, I have one doubt regards when the R value is high.
Go ahead.
Sir, if it is near the global minima, dE by d theta would be very, very less, right? Then why would that overshooting matter a lot at that particular point? If it is overshooting, it would just be oscillating very near to that
But
global
you know,
minima.
if you have a very steep curve, for example, very steep curve, okay, extremely steep curve, okay, then at some point, okay, because if you kept your value, the R value large, okay, so a very steep curve, then say previous point could be little far away from the point where you have the either the local or the global minima, okay. So in that case, of course, it will basically overshoot for a very large value of R. You think in terms of also the nature of the curve as well. So for a flat curve, that cannot happen, but for a steep curve, that can happen.
Okay, sir, got it.
Yeah. Okay. So I hope you can see my slide.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So the method that now I am going to talk about is called adaptive moment estimation, or ADAM. Okay, and that is something that everybody uses in deep learning. So this kind of the default optimization method in deep learning. Okay, whenever you run deep learning, you will set ADAM. Okay, and it again stands on the same, basically gradient based things, the same idea, but we will try to overcome some of the limitations of the other two approaches. Okay. So now we try to kind of recap where we stand. So in vanilla gradient descent, you have seen that the learning rate is a problematic thing. So because this is not adaptive in nature. Okay. So to overcome that, we kind of try to use the history of the past gradients, okay, to kind of adapt the learning rate in AdaGrad. Okay. So that is one problem that we were able to kind of tackle to some extent. But still, in both these two approaches, the stochastic gradient descent and AdaGrad, still there is one major problem. Okay, so can anybody guess what that problem is? So in both the approaches, they are common. Both the approaches that we talked about, this problem is common.
Sir, can you repeat question?
So we have seen how we can tackle the adaptive learning rate, right, in AdaGrad. But still, in both these approaches that we talked about, the vanilla gradient descent as well as AdaGrad, there is still one major problem.
So it cannot find out the global minimum.
Okay, so global minima, yeah, that's a problem, but global minima is something, I mean, at least for non-convex functions, nobody knows how to find global minima. So that is still remain the problem challenge. I mean, this problem for all the methods. Okay, and that's the problem, yeah. Any other problem that can be tackled a little bit better way that you see?
So the initial guessing of the parameters.
Okay, initial guessing of the parameters is one problem. Okay, what else?
The step size remains fixed, so when we are nearing the minimum, then the step size should become smaller for efficiency of the algorithm.
Yeah. Okay, so that is what I think AdaGrad is trying to do, in a sense, like depending upon the history of these gradients. So that's why it is called adaptive gradient descent.
Sir, initial learning rate.
Okay, so what's the problem with the initial learning rate?
Because if it is too high, then it may overshoot at the first iteration only.
In principle that can happen, but so you are randomly like initializing the initial points, and then initializing this value of r. But it's a very complex surface with like millions of parameters. The probability is very small. Okay, that you are very close to the first initialization. You are very close to the actual minima, and then you overshoot. That's still very unlikely to happen.
Okay, sir.
Right, because the surface is so big, so complex. Okay, any other things in terms of direction of movement? Like, is there any problem with the way we are computing the direction of movement? Do you see any problem there? Okay, so let me try to explain what do I mean by that. Okay, so I hope you are convinced that we are using these gradients to guide our direction of movement. Okay, now let me contextualize from the batch gradient descent. So you know your error function exactly as is based on the all the training samples that you're using. Okay, so your total error function is basically telling you all about the surface, loss surface. And so you are using that function directly to guide your direction. That is not a problem. But when you're using stochastic gradient descent, so be it single sample or a sample of B, what you are trying to achieve at every batch or every sample, whatever for the time being, assume that the mini batch gradient descent we are doing. So each mini batch is actually guiding you which direction you should move in order to find the actual minima in terms of the whole set. That's your ultimate goal, because if you are only going to perform very well on a batch but not performing well on the entire data set, that is not something desirable. Okay, so the hope is that a mini batch that you are considering is giving you the right direction. Okay, so that is what we are actually assuming. And so it is like this, and I always take this analogy, something like this. Probably it will help you to better understand the situation. So for the first time you are coming inside the campus, IIT Kharagpur campus, okay, and you know nothing about the inside of the campus. But only thing you know that, okay, where, like, you know this location where you have to go. Okay, say for example you have to go some, for example, empty hall, or say Tikka, wherever, somewhere. Okay, the place there, but you do not know how to get there. Okay, so you are in the main gate, and the obvious thing that you want to do is that you want to consult people standing at the main gate. They're asking them, okay, I want to reach to Tikka, how we should basically proceed. What would be the direction of my movement? Okay, so there are 4 or 5 people sitting there, so you can ask them, so they will give you, and you can basically combine that information and then take the decision. So then basically you move forward. Now, just in front of the main building, there is 3, like, as 4, I think the 4, there's a crossing. Again, you have to take a decision that which direction you should move. So you can, what you do, you do not know. So you ask people sitting there, standing there, that which direction I should move. And again, you consult them, you, depending upon their opinion, okay, you take the right route and then you move forward. So the stochastic gradient descent is working something like in that fashion. Okay, at every point you are consulting a batch of samples and telling you that which direction you should move. Something like that you are doing. In real life, that's what we do. Now, what is the problem? So say in the main gate, the people gave you the right direction. Okay. In the second junction, 5, 6 people they consulted, give you the right direction. Okay. Now the next junction, you are consulting some people accidentally. Okay, if they for some reason they may basically misguide you. They end up telling you the wrong direction. Okay, so you would take the wrong direction, you go somewhere else. Okay, like bypassing your main target, and then again you have to basically go there, you consult somebody, you have to correct your mistake, then you come back, and so on and so forth. So this is going to basically slow down the whole process of finding your target destination. Okay, so that is one of the problem with this typical batch gradient descent, along with the kind of things that we have seen, where the only current gradient in the sense that the gradient based on the current batch or current sample is guiding your direction. Okay, does this make sense?
Sir, in this case, like you said in stochastic gradient descent, this was an issue because we are trusting on only a single example. But
Right.
when we are considering a batch, then the probability of getting misguided is becoming less, right?
Lesser compared to the single sample guidance, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
because you are concerned. But still, the problem still remains when you have say, what is the problem? I probably tell you the problem. Now, in modern machine learning, you basically deal with billions and billions of examples, training examples, and your batch size is how much? Sometimes it is 256 or at most 1000. So you're approximating the whole thing from 1 billion example using only say 1000 or 256 examples, right? But you are right, it is much better than the single sample thing, but still the problem is there. Okay.
Okay, sir. Understood.
Okay, so that was one of the main issue. So adaptability, learning rate adaptability is issue that we, to some extent, was able to address, but this issue we have not addressed yet. Okay. So the adaptive moment estimation exactly looks into these two aspects. So one is adaptive learning as well as this gradient correction problem. Okay. Two things it is actually trying to address. Okay, in one shot. And that's what we're basically trying to look into. Okay, so let's see how we actually do that in reality. So what we do, we actually use two things in this case, two quantities. So one is a decaying average of past gradients and decaying average of past squared gradients. So the first point, okay, let me just actually show you the expression and then I will try to explain. The first point is this: mt is which is basically your actual direction of movement of the gradient. Mt is equals to beta 1 into the previous mt plus 1 minus beta 1 into the current gradient based on the current example or current batch. And where beta 1 is a hyperparameter lying between 0 to 1. This is a scalar quantity. Okay, so it's a combination of the all previous gradient which you summarized in expression am t minus 1 plus the current gradient based on the current batch that you are considering. Okay, so essentially you are taking the history of everything so far. Okay, and the second expression, so Vd is something very similar to what we have seen in AdaGrad. So it's basically you are taking the squared gradients. Okay, some weighted combination of squared gradients. So these two information we are actually making use of. So the first information we are using. Yeah. Any question?
So what is MT and VT here?
So MT is basically, you can say, the correct kind of direction of movement or the correct gradient. Not correct, but corrected rather gradient that we're going to take. Okay. So in a sense, it is a weighted average of the past gradients only. Okay. And similarly, VT is basically weighted average of the past squared gradients.
So what does decaying mean? Can you tell once again?
Sorry.
What does decaying mean in this expression?
Oh, decaying mean in this case is that now if you look at the values of beta 1 and beta 2, okay, so beta 1 means that it's always like very close to 1 actually. So the information from the current batch that you are using is very little, but mostly you are using the information from the previous batches. Okay, And in the next slide, we are going to see how we are actually making all the decays. There is an expression for that. Okay. So these two information we are using. So the first information is to correct the gradient problem, the direction problem that I just mentioned, okay, which you never handled in either of these two methods before. And the second information we are going to use to correct the adaptive bias, adaptive learning rate issue. Okay. So let's look at this. So here, of course, you need to have the MT and VT initialized. So you basically initialize MT and VT to 0. Okay. Initial, because you do not know initially what to the values. So thus basically when you are starting off, these values are biased towards 0. So there is some correction factor that people introduced. So that the actual MT that you use is MT by original MT by 1 minus beta 1 to the power t, and VT is basically the original VT by 1 minus beta to the power t, while t is the number of iteration, and that is what I actually refer to as a decaying average. So you are essentially, as you move progress, okay, iteration, then you are basically doing this kind of corrections little bit. Okay. So here is this expression, the final expression that you have. You have the same thing. Okay. So just like slight changes here. Now you can see here the final update rule that MT that we are going to use is basically MT by 1 minus beta 1 to the power t. Beta and beta 2, beta 1 and beta 2 are the hyperparameters. Okay. And you also have this VT expression defined before. And the update rule changes slightly. Okay. So update rule is basically now taking into consideration both this kind of, in a sense, the weighted average of the means and the squared gradients that you have, which is basically VT cap. Okay. And so this is how basically we are going to address this thing. Now, the C here is the again something like learning rate. I just use C because the paper those who talked about the Adam thing, they actually introduced C parameters. Yeah, go ahead.
So t raised to beta 1, beta 2 is superscript or power?
T is a power.
Okay.
T is a power. Okay. T is not superscript, it's power. Because beta 1 and beta 2 they are both scalar. Okay. So you fixed once at the beginning.
So can you please repeat what is MT and VT?
Sorry?
So can you please repeat what is MT and VT?
Okay, MT and VT. Let me go back to my expression. So here is this MT. MT is, so in a sense, MT is it's basically moving average. Okay, moving average of means. Moving average of the gradients. Okay. Make sense?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and VT is basically moving average of the squared of the gradients. Make sense?
Yes, sir, clear.
Okay. So that's what we actually do. If you recall the expression that we had in AdaGrad, we are actually using BT, slightly different form of BT, not the weighted average, but plain average. But roughly similar to that is BT. And now we introduce another one concept called MT, which is weighted average of all the past gradients, just to minimize those randomness, because if one particular batch misguides you, just to avoid that. Okay, so essentially you are using other batches also, information from this batches also to guide your direction of movement. That's what you are doing. Okay.
Sir, in this case, as we are progressing with the iterations, let's say t to t plus 1, t plus 2. So so in the tth iteration, the GT is, the weightage of GT is not given very much. Like beta 1, if it is approximately close to 1, then 1 minus beta 1 is like very small. So yeah, when we are progressing more and more towards the next iterations, then actually that 1 minus beta 1 is getting multiplied by beta 1 power something. So right, then the tth iteration, the weightage of the tth iteration is given for the later iterations. So is it something like this?
Repeat your question again. So say beta 1 and beta 2 remains the same. It remains same throughout your like algorithm. It is not changing. Okay.
Yes, sir, I got it. But let's say what I am saying is, if we are substituting mt minus 1 in terms of t minus 2, then that is what I am asking. So then there will be beta 1 square mt minus 2 plus beta 1 into 1 minus beta 1 gt minus 1. So the previous gradients is now, as we are progressing towards more and more number of iterations, the previous gradients are given more weightage because beta 1 into 1 minus beta 1 is greater than only 1 minus beta 1.
Definitely, because the left hand side is given more weightage than the right hand side. Yes, of course.
So beta 1 is less than 1. So when beta 1 is multiplied by 1 minus beta 1, the value decreases. So for
Beta
G
1
minus 2,
beta 2 is less than 1, yeah.
so beta 1 into 1 minus beta 1 is less than 1 minus beta 1. So it has lesser weightage.
So the past gradients, if you mt minus 1 is given more weightage than the
Yes,
current
yes.
gradient. Yeah, this is always the case. Okay, because you want to, why this is happening intuitively. Now GT is what? GT is basically the gradient based on the current batch only. Okay? Make sense?
Yes.
Okay, and mt minus is what? mt minus 1 is basically summary of, in a sense, summary of the gradients that we have seen before till now. Okay? So therefore, you basically are emphasizing more on mt minus 1, less on GT. You are using GT for sure, but little bit, not too much. Just to avoid that the brittleness problem that I mentioned. In case there is one batch which is kind of to some extent erroneous, that can basically misguide you. Okay?
Because the earlier batches will have like b to the power m minus 1, where m is the number of batches. And the latest one will have just 1 minus b. So are we not saying that the recent batches are more important and the older batches are less important?
Can you repeat your question?
Sir, are we not saying that the older batches are less important? Because as we keep multiplying with b, the older batches keep getting multiplied by b, so they get like b power m. So b is less than 1, so the value of older batches get negligibly small and the newer batches is relatively high. So is it that we are considering the older batches to be less important and the newer batches to be more important?
So based on what? Based on you are talking about this expression that I currently showing in my slide, or based on the correction that we're talking about?
Based on the expression in the slide.
Okay, so what is happening here? See that. So what is mt minus 1? Mt minus 1 is basically weighted combination of the past gradients, right? That you have in mt minus 1. Okay. Yes. Okay. So, and then that particular expression is given. So beta 1 is 0.9 in this case. Okay. So that expression is, sorry, go ahead. Okay. Okay, any question from anybody? I thought there is some question from somebody.
Sir, can you explain that biasing once?
What biasing?
Yes, sir.
This one. Okay.
Yes.
Here, because these the initial values of MTs and BTs are initialized to 1. Okay, so of course initially they will be biased towards 0. Sorry, initialized to 0. So they will be biased towards 0. Okay, initial values of that MTs and BTs. Okay, and so that in a sense, in order to correct that kind of bias, you introduce this concept So you correct little bit. So original value by 1 minus b1 to the power t, beta 1 to the power t. And so what is happening in this case, as you are increasing your number of iteration, t in this case, because beta 1 and beta 2 are both less than 1. So as you move forward, take more and more iteration, okay, over your data, then the denominator becomes close to 1 actually. Okay, are you convinced about that?
Sir, like I don't understand why are we like I understood that in the starting we'll be biased towards the origin
0.
point. But why are we doing like this, sir? Like, why are we adjusting it?
Were you adjusting like this?
Yes, sir.
Okay, you were adjusting like this simply because as you are moving forward in your iteration, right? So then basically as you are moving forward, you are updating your gradients and everything and all. So there are lots of updates in the gradients. Okay, so as a result, the initial bias is not there. Okay, so because initial bias is not there, you want to get the original values.
Understood that part, but we're already upgrading MT with the formula MT minus 1 into 1 minus beta, that thing, right?
No, but here you have the original thing. So once you have this, you compute MT and VT from these expressions. Okay.
Oh, then you again scale it.
Then you basically update this using this expression.
Okay, okay, I understood. Yes,
yeah,
sir,
and then basically you apply this one. Okay. Finally, you are using M cap T, not TMT.
Sir?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sir, like how updating with this expression with bias correction helps it to like be not biased towards 0? Like I couldn't understand.
Okay, so intuitively, what is happening is that as you move forward in this iteration, then basically your M cap T is actually close to original value MT. Okay, you are returning these values. Okay, but initially when you are starting off, for example, think about the very first iteration or second iteration and so on and so forth. So because you initialized your MT and V2 to 0, okay, it was the random initialization. I mean, it's basically initialization to 0 values. So in the very first few iterations, okay, your actual MT value or these updates and everything that we are doing will be biased towards 0 because it was initialized to 0. Okay. And as a result, you want to make this dependent on the number of iteration, because as you move forward in the computation, takes more and more and more iteration. Okay, then your gradients and the MTs and BTs and everything are much more matured. So you have to return those values. But the thing is that how this expression actually came into picture, MT by 1 minus beta 1 to the power T and so on and so forth. There is a proof why this basically came into place. Okay, so I omitted the proof for the presentation, but if you like, I can basically show you the proof next time from the paper. So this did not come out of blue actually. There is a proof.
Yes. So like, is it initially as MT and VT will be very small values,
Right.
but the denominator will also be quite small in initial iteration. So M cap T will be high, will be.
Yeah, in a sense like that. Yes, I mean intuitively that, but then the intuition doesn't explain everything. So there's actual proof there in the paper, so that basically help you to figure out this expression.
Okay, sir. So then even about the original expression of MT, like even this has a proof, right? So like how did this original MT, like this expression come into being?
For this one?
Yes,
you mean
sir.
this expression? Okay, so the proof in the sense that there's some convergence proof, how fast it is actually converging and things like that. They have that, yes, in the paper. Okay, so if you are interested, I can show you the proof maybe in the next lecture. Okay. It's very loaded with this real analysis and all. So like not everybody may be interested in this. But if there is a general interest, I can show you the proof next time, or else I can take one somebody who is interested in this. So yeah, I'm happy to do that, no problem. Okay.
Sir, so in this case, we are actually focusing, giving more weightage to the present gradient, and the previous gradients we are giving less weightage at the current iteration.
So, yeah.
Yes, sir. So, is it going like that? And as we are progressing with the iterations, the previous gradients weightage is becoming less and less. Is it like that?
That's absolutely correct. So I won't say present gradient. So present gradient means here, if you look at this expression, so by present gradient, do you mean that the gradient based on the current batch that I'm processing? That's what you're referring to, or something else you're referring to?
Sir, at the Tth iteration, I'm saying.
So what this expression is actually telling you to some extent, you are actually emphasizing on the latest, I think, last few gradients more than the older gradients actually. Okay. So you just think in terms of this. Okay. MT, okay, MT is a weighted combination of MT minus 1, which is the sum weighted combination of gradients before the Tth iteration, and the current gradient. Now, which one is getting more weightage in this case? MT minus 1 or GT?
Sir, in this case, MT minus 1.
MT minus 1. So GT is the gradient based on the current batch. Okay, you are convinced about that. So the current batch is getting little weight in this case, but more weight is basically getting, your MT is getting from MT minus 1. Okay, which is weighted combination of the past gradients.
So even though like MT minus 1 is getting more weight, but MT minus 1 in itself is like, it again contains 1 minus beta into the previous gradient. So
yes,
in a way, we are multiplying beta with the previous gradient and making it smaller compared to the original gradient of this iteration.
Right, absolutely right. But you know, this is not equivalent to saying that the GT is getting more weight than the others. What I'm trying to say is that you are giving more weight to the most recent gradients. Very old gradients, you are not basically giving too much of weightage to that, because there is a multiplication factor beta 1. Yes, you are right on that.
Okay, so got it.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
Sir, like to comment on this, we are already updating the theta values in the previous expressions, and in the next only in the next iteration we are trying to give more weightage to the GT, sir. More weightage to the current gradient. So it's not like we are giving more weightage to the current gradient. It's just that we have already given more weightage to the previous gradients. So we're trying to reduce the weightage. Is it something like that?
Yes, I think yes. That's, yeah, maybe, yeah. Okay, so okay, so this is the okay. So there are few suggestions from the paper, like what should be the value of C, what should be the value of epsilon, beta 1 and beta 2, and so on and so forth. So from the original paper, I copied these parameters. But again, these parameters may not be the whole truth of everything. So it depends on, again, the nature of the data, problem, error function, everything that you are basically dealing with. So when you are actually running these experiments or building your deep learning models, okay, then you basically have to do a little bit of experiments with these parameters. Okay. So one final comment is that the ADAM is the state-of-the-art optimization technique for modern deep learning. So whatever you do, feed-forward network, CNN, RNN, transformer, everything, people use ADAM. That's the kind of default choice for the modern deep learning deep networks. Okay. All right. So let's now, okay. So yeah, now we basically try to talk about deep neural network stuff. Okay. And in the next few lectures, I'm going to talk in detail the fundamentals of deep neural network. Okay, what it can do, how you train the networks, and so on and so forth. Okay?
Sir, a question in the previous slide.
Okay. So, yeah, go ahead.
Sir, here the C value, is it the initial learning rate?
Yeah, it is always constant. Yeah, learning rate. Yes.
So the initial learning rate is always chosen to be very small. Like here it is 0.001.
Yeah, it's very small.
Okay.
It's very small. I mean, actually, this is not, if you kind of compare this initial learning rate to other settings, then it's 0.001 is not actually small. So compared to the other settings, it is actually big. Okay.
Okay.
But yeah, it is set once at the beginning. Okay.
Sir, for the first iteration, VT would be 0, right, sir?
VT would be 0.
So then actually the learning rate is C by epsilon, which is a very big value, right?
It's a big value, yes.
Oh, but yes.
That's true. But C remains constant throughout your computation. C is not changing.
Okay.
Okay, so let's get into probably something that you guys are most interested in. Most of the things in machine learning people do using deep neural network. So let's get started into that. Okay. So, and I will try to give you the foundation for that, so that you can basically build upon this foundation to get things done, like you build new networks, train, everything else. Okay. So what's the motivation? Let's start with a very small example, simple example to motivate. So, deep learning is useful to many kinds of tasks like classification, regression, natural language processing, like tagging, whether particular thing is named entity or not, and many other applications you can basically use deep learning. Speech recognition, voice recognition, all kinds of stuff you do it. So I start with a simple example, which is key recommendation. Okay, movie recommendation is in a sense a classification problem. Okay, so what is that problem? That you have two friends, John and Mary. Okay, and you have prior data, some past data telling that movies that you liked or disliked that your friends actually rated. Okay, so and now a new movie comes in this case is Gravity. Okay, and for example, Netflix or Amazon Prime or somebody wants to recommend, wants to basically see whether they can recommend this movie to you or not. That means depending upon your choice, your similarity with your friends, okay, they want to recommend whether you are going to like this movie or not. Just take the decision, yes, no kind of thing. That's what you want to do. Okay, and there is a famous problem, I think, in Netflix. Had their movie recommendation challenge, they basically, I think they gave $5 billion maybe 10 years ago for this, only for this particular problem. Back then, deep learning was not so popular. Okay, so people did something else. But anyway, it's a famous problem. So what is the problem in this case? What you have the data. Okay, now before you get into deep learning, I always request everybody that make sure that you understand the data very well. What's this data and what you need to do? It's very, very important. Don't blindly just go and use deep learning. So here is what the data is. The data, you have the movie name. Okay. Then the movie that Mary's rating. Okay, for that particular movie. And for this movie, John's rating also there. The rating is basically numeric value, number 1 to say 5. And the target variable, whether you like this movie or not. Okay, that is the past data that you have. Similarly, Star Wars 1, you have Mary's rating 4.5, John's rating 4, and then you actually like this movie, something like this. Now, Gravity, new movie. Mary watched, and Mary gave it 3 rating, John gave it 3 rating. Okay, and the system needs to decide whether you are going to like this or not. Okay, so it's whether it is a yes or no kind of thing. Just a binary classification problem, okay, on this data. Okay, and this is, I'm going to use this example, simple example, to illustrate the main idea of deep learning. Okay, so what do you do? Okay, it's a binary classification problem, yes no kind of thing. So if I plot this data, for example, this data that I have here in this, so data is going to look like this. The red circles are something that you liked. The blue crosses are something that you disliked. And a new movie, which is basically the square box, pink box, the new movie, and you have to decide whether you're going to like it or not like it. Okay. Now what is this data? And it looks like that this is linearly separable. That means if I can find out a good straight line separating these two classes, okay, then basically I know for a new movie which side this is going to fall. Okay, left or right or something like that. Okay. So this is what I'm going to do. Now, in order to do that, what I can do, I can basically apply now. How can I predict the level for new movies, the gravity? Okay, that's the question that I have to address. So, as you know from logistic regression, that logistic regression, this standard logistic regression, it can basically model the linear decision boundary, and it's a two-class classification algorithm. Okay, binary class classification algorithm, yes or no, 0 or 1, things like that. So I can basically apply logistic regression for this task. Okay, once I have this straight line ready, then using this logistic regression, I can figure out that whether this value is close to 0 or close to 1. Okay, for this pink box. Okay, now what's the graphical view of the logistic regression? And I told you initially that logistic regression is the foundation of like this modern deep learning. Okay, so it's, you can think about deep learning is nothing but a collection of thousands and thousands of logistic regression functions. Okay, people use a ReLU nowadays, but that's a little bit of changes anyway. So what's the graphical view of logistic regression in terms of these neural network examples? I mean neural network structures. So you have two things, x1 and x2 as input. Okay, you have their associated weights. Weights for x1 is w1, weight for x2 is w2. Then you have an activation function, in this case f1z, and it has a bias b, and then activation function is basically producing some output value, okay, from your output. Okay, so that's the kind of the graphical representation. If I graphically put it, neural network like expression, if I put it, logistic regression function, this way I can put it. Okay, now I mentioned all about these things. The W1, W2 are the weights, B is the bias, which you typically have. So Z is basically W1 x1, W2 x2 plus B, which is the linear combination of the values. Okay, and FZ is the logistic function or sigmoid function, which is e to the power z by 1 plus e to the power z, and people often call this activation function. Okay, now this is sort of this representation issue. Okay, now what the logistic regression is doing actually in this case, okay, so given an input sample, okay, without any label, it is telling which side of the straight line the sample lies, whether the left side or the right side. That's what it is actually telling you. Okay, all right. Now this line that is represented by z in this case, that's what you do, and then basically you pass it through the sigmoid function to determine whether the value is close to 0 or close to 1, something like that you're trying to do. Okay, all right. Now for this sample, and I think I discussed this again once when we introduced the logistic regression concept, but just for a quick recap, for this particular sample pointed by this arrow, the value of z will be positive. Okay, so therefore the value of fz will be greater than 0.5. Okay, so now consider an example data like this. Okay, previous case we were lucky, but consider data like this. For example, say your data is from your data, for example, you're going to plot this data and then you're going to see something like this. Now no longer you can separate this out using a single straight line. You never find a single straight line which will separate two classes, the blue from the red one, correctly. You can never do that, at least for this particular data. Okay, so in a situation like this, what one should do? So what one should do is something like this. that actually we need the multiple decision boundaries or multiple straight lines in this case. So if I can draw these two straight lines, then I can combine the information from these two straight lines to determine that whether I am from one class or from the other class. Okay, so if say I am above the black straight line, below the green straight line, then I am in one class, or else I'm in a different class. So you need to combine the information from these two straight lines. Okay, so modern neural networks actually do this kind of combining of logistic regression or things like that in a complex situation like this. Okay, so basically it's 9:55. I will stop today, and then we will like take our discussion forward in the next few lectures on deep learning. Okay. All right. So any question, any comments from anybody?
Excuse me, sir.
Please, yeah, go ahead.
Sir, for SDG, but where can we get some reading material for it, because it was not bit clear to me.
Okay,
SDG and AdaGrad.
Okay, so the very first lecture I mentioned couple of books for basic machine learning. Okay, so you may want to consult those books, some of these books. But if you like other materials, I can also like provide those materials as well. So like some tutorials.
So the books that will have basically these topics, because the element of statistical learning doesn't seem to have this topic.
No, but the other books I mentioned, no, they have. So the Adam is, probably Adam is the latest one. So you probably won't find in any book. So for the Adam, I will give you the main paper that they introduced the Adam concept. Okay. Yeah. So I will upload these papers to the folder in NSTL.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. But remember that the papers are very tricky to read because papers have lots of other stuff.
Something that will make it easier to understand, because tricky will be more difficult to understand.
Okay, all right, yeah, sure.
Okay.
Okay, so then see you on next Monday.
Excuse me, sir.
Go ahead.
Sir, regarding the assignment, sir, where will it be uploaded and by when?
Yeah, so I prepared an assignment, but I just check it either by tonight or maybe tomorrow morning.
Sir, on Teams itself, right?
The assignments will be uploaded on Teams as well as on Moodle. Do you have the Moodle access?
So which Moodle? Like one is the
machine learning.
No, sir, we don't have.
So I actually sent all the list of all the names to this Moodle administrator, and he responded to me saying that he created accounts for everybody. So I hope you should be able to access this. You just check once whether you can access this.
Okay, sir, we'll check.
Because he confirmed me to me that he did it all.
So do we have to use the same Moodle account we have been using from our first year?
I think yes, but I will check once whether I think yes, but I will check and confirm, then I will let you know. I'll drop you an email.
So can you ask the administrator to send us the email
yes.
login and passwords?
Yeah, sure, I will do that. Sure. Okay, so bye then. We'll see you next Monday.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.